Welcome to Rise of Emily, a story of determination, family, and second chances. Emily, a single mother, opens her dream bakery, but soon faces tough competition and the overwhelming challenge of balancing her business and home life. Will she hold it all together, or will everything fall apart? Follow her journey to see how she fights to save both her dream and her family. Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more stories of resilience and hope. Emily Walker stood behind the counter of her newly opened bakery, gazing out at the bustling street through the large glass storefront. The sight of her shop, Sweet Beginnings, in full operation, should have filled her with pride, and it did, mostly. The smell of fresh bread and pastries wafted through the air, and the warmth from the ovens filled the room with comforting coziness. Customers wandered in and out, some grabbing a quick coffee and croissant, others lingering at the small tables to enjoy their treats. But behind the excitement of the bakery's grand opening, a familiar feeling of anxiety twisted in her stomach. Emily had worked so hard for this moment, scraping by as a single mother, raising 2 kids on her own, all while holding down jobs that barely paid the bills. She had lived through years of financial uncertainty, learning to make do with very little, putting her children first every step of the way. Now, thanks to her brother Daniel's support, her dream of owning a bakery was a reality, but it didn't come without complications. "Mom, you okay?" Ethan, her 12-year-old son, asked as he walked up to the counter, a hint of concern in his voice. He was tall for his age, with the same dark eyes as Emily's late father, and he'd grown up far too quickly. Emily blinked, realizing she had been lost in thought. She smiled at Ethan, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking." "You're thinking too much," Ethan said with a shrug, but his attempt at sounding nonchalant didn't fool her. He had inherited her worry, always watching out for her, as if the roles had reversed, and he was the parent. "Just a lot going on," she admitted, glancing around the bakery. "But we'll be okay." Ethan smiled a little. "We're always okay, Mom." Emily's heart swelled with both pride and guilt. Her kids had been through so much with her. They had learned to make do with little, too. Though they never complained, Emily knew the sacrifices they had made. No new clothes for school, no vacations, and no time spent together that didn't involve her juggling a second job. She wanted more for them. This bakery wasn't just her dream. It was her way of giving her children the life they deserved. She was grateful for Daniel's help. Her brother had swooped in after their emotional reunion, offering not just financial support, but a lifeline. He had invested in her business, helping her secure the shop and purchase all the necessary equipment. Without him, this bakery would have remained nothing more than a far-off dream, a maybe someday. But accepting Daniel's help hadn't been easy. Emily prided herself on her independence, and though she loved her brother, she didn't want to feel indebted to him. As she wiped down the counter, Grace, her mother, bustled in from the kitchen, wiping flour from her hands. "That last batch of muffins is ready, Emily. Do you want me to set them out?" "Thanks, Mom," Emily said, appreciating her mother's help. Since moving into her new apartment and reconnecting with Daniel, Grace had been there for Emily, both emotionally and practically. She was the reason Emily had made it through the tough years. Her mother's quiet strength was a constant source of comfort, but Emily knew Grace had her own battles to fight. Grace smiled, though it was a little tired around the edges. She had aged in the last few years, the weight of decades of financial struggles and her own personal losses etched into her face. "You're doing good here, Emily," she said, patting her on the shoulder. "This place, it's a blessing." Emily nodded, her heart aching with the tension between gratitude and the overwhelming need to prove herself. "Yeah, it is." The first few days of Sweet Beginnings were a whirlwind. Word had spread quickly in the neighborhood about the new bakery, and curious locals streamed in to check it out. Every morning, the line stretched out the door, customers eager to try Emily's homemade bread, croissants, and her specialty cinnamon rolls. It was everything she had hoped for, and more. But the pressure of running a business soon became evident. As the foot traffic increased, so did the complexity of keeping everything running smoothly. Emily found herself constantly juggling the tasks of baking, managing the register, keeping track of inventory, and ensuring the kitchen was operating efficiently. Grace helped as much as she could, but even with her mother's assistance, the work was exhausting. In the evenings after the bakery closed, Emily would sit at the small table in her apartment, poring over invoices, receipts, and bills, her eyes burning from lack of sleep. The financial reality of running a business was beginning to hit hard. The bakery was busy, but the overhead costs were much higher than she'd anticipated. Rent, utilities, ingredients, and paying the part-time staff she had hired all added up. Emily knew the first few months would be tough, but she hadn't realized just how razor-thin her profit margins would be. Then there were the mistakes. Small things at first, forgetting to order enough flour for the next week, mislabeling some of the pastries. But as the days wore on, the exhaustion caught up to her. One morning, she accidentally burned a batch of croissants when she got distracted by a call from the supplier. Another day, she mixed up delivery orders and sent a batch of vegan muffins to a catering event that required gluten-free pastries. Each mistake chipped away at her confidence. It was hard not to feel like she was failing her customers, failing her children, and failing herself. Every night she went to bed exhausted, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that maybe she wasn't cut out for this. The bakery wasn't Emily's only responsibility. At home, she was still a mother to Ethan and Lily. While Ethan had stepped up in recent years, helping around the house and taking care of his younger sister, Emily knew it wasn't fair to put so much on his shoulders. He was only 12 after all, and Lily was still just a child at 9. They both needed their mother's attention, her love, and her presence, but lately, Emily felt like she was barely holding it together. One evening, after a particularly long day at the bakery, Emily came home to find Ethan helping Lily with her homework. The sight warmed her heart, but it also brought a pang of guilt. She should have been the one sitting with Lily, explaining math problems and reading over spelling words, not her son. "Hey, Mom," Ethan said, looking up from the kitchen table. His face brightened, but Emily could see the tiredness in his eyes too. "How was work?" "Busy," Emily replied, forcing a smile. She set her purse down and leaned against the counter, rubbing her temples. "How's everything here?" "Fine," Ethan said, glancing at Lily, who was diligently working on her spelling assignment. "I made dinner. There's leftovers if you're hungry." Emily's heart clenched. She hadn't even thought about dinner. "Thank you, Ethan," she said softly. "You're a lifesaver." Ethan shrugged, trying to appear casual, but Emily could see the weight he was carrying. He had taken on so much, and it wasn't fair. She was the parent. She was the one who should be taking care of them, not the other way around. Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, Emily sat down next to Ethan on the couch. He was flipping through TV channels, though his attention seemed distant. "Hey," she said, her voice soft. "Can we talk for a minute?" Ethan nodded, turning off the TV. "Sure." Emily hesitated, unsure of how to broach the subject. "I just want you to know that I see how much you're doing to help out, and I appreciate it more than I can say. But I don't want you to feel like you have to take care of everything." Ethan looked down at his hands, picking at the edge of his sleeve. "It's fine, Mom. I don't mind. I know you're busy with the bakery." "I know," Emily said gently. "But you're still a kid, Ethan. You shouldn't have to worry about stuff like dinner and homework all the time. That's my job. Ethan shrugged, still avoiding her gaze. I just want to help. And you do, Emily assured him. You help me so much. But I want you to have time to just be a kid too. You shouldn't have to worry about all this grown-up stuff. Ethan finally looked up at her, his expression serious. But if I don't help, who will? The question hit Emily like a punch to the gut. She had spent so many years in survival mode that she hadn't realized how much responsibility had fallen on Ethan's shoulders. He had grown up too fast, and she hated that. But what could she do? The bakery needed her attention, and her children needed her too. I'm going to figure this out, Emily said, her voice full of determination. I promise. But even as she made that promise, a voice in the back of her mind whispered doubt. How could she be the mother her children needed when the bakery demanded every ounce of her energy? How could she balance both worlds without one falling apart? A few days later, after the morning rush at the bakery had slowed down, Grace sat down with Emily at one of the small tables. The cafe was quieter now, with just a few customers scattered throughout, sipping coffee and reading newspapers. Grace took a sip of her tea, watching Emily with a thoughtful expression. You're running yourself ragged, honey, she said, her voice gentle but firm. Emily sighed, resting her chin in her hands. I know, Mom. I don't know how to fix it. There's so much to do here, and then there's the kids, and I feel like I'm failing at both. Grace reached across the table, taking Emily's hand in hers. You're not failing. You're trying to do it all by yourself, and that's the problem. Emily frowned. But I have to. It's my business, my kids. I have to make this work. I know you're strong, Emily, Grace said. But even the strongest people need help sometimes. You've been trying to carry everything on your own for so long that you don't know how to lean on anyone else, but you don't have to do this alone. Emily bit her lip, feeling the familiar sting of pride and stubbornness. She had spent years learning to be independent, to rely on no one but herself. It was hard to let go of that, even when she knew her mother was right. I don't want to feel like I owe anyone anything, Emily said quietly. Grace smiled, her eyes soft with understanding. Accepting help doesn't mean you owe anyone anything. It just means you're human. And right now, you've got a lot of people who care about you. Me, Daniel, Ethan, and Lily. We're all here for you. You don't have to do this by yourself. The words sank into Emily's heart, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to admit that she was tired. Tired of trying to be everything for everyone. Tired of feeling like she was constantly falling short. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe it was time to let others in. The days rolled into weeks, and while sweet beginnings continued to thrive in the eyes of customers, Emily felt like she was drowning. The shop was busier than she could have hoped for, but the cost of that success was mounting. Each night after the bakery closed, Emily collapsed onto her couch, physically and mentally drained. Her hands ached from kneading dough, her back hurt from standing all day, and her mind buzzed with to-do lists and worries about bills piling up on her kitchen table. She stared at the financial statements spread out before her, biting her lip in frustration. On the surface, the bakery was doing well, but the overhead costs were swallowing the profits. Rent, ingredients, employee wages, utilities, it all added up so quickly. She had taken out a small business loan, which felt like a noose around her neck, and even with Daniel's help, the pressure to stay afloat was overwhelming. Emily was beginning to fear that her dream was slipping away, despite her relentless effort. The worst part was that she didn't want Daniel to know just how much she was struggling. He had been so generous, offering her not just financial support but encouragement at every turn. She didn't want to disappoint him. but lately her pride had started to feel more like a burden than a shield. As much as she hated the idea of relying on her brother again, a part of her wondered if she should reach out for help before it was too late. Emily rubbed her temples and closed her eyes, letting out a deep sigh. The bakery had started off strong, but now she was terrified that it was all slipping through her fingers, and the fear was only getting worse with the opening of a new competitor in the area, a sleek, modern cafe called Sugar and Spice that had set up shop just down the street. The first time Emily had walked past Sugar and Spice, she had felt her stomach sink. The place was all glass and chrome, with trendy decor, artisanal coffees, and pastries that looked more like pieces of art. It was everything Sweet Beginnings wasn't: glamorous, cutting-edge, expensive. And while Emily prided herself on making simple, delicious baked goods that felt homemade, she couldn't help but feel like her quaint little bakery might be out of its league. As the days passed, Sugar and Spice started drawing more and more of the morning crowd. Emily's usual regulars still came in, but she noticed the change. People were curious about the new place, and they were flocking there to see what all the hype was about. The drop in business was gradual but noticeable, and it gnawed at Emily's confidence. Determined not to lose customers to Sugar and Spice, Emily tried everything she could think of to keep Sweet Beginnings competitive. She extended the bakery's hours, opening earlier and staying open later to attract more customers. She introduced new menu items, fancier pastries, specialty coffees, but none of them seemed to make much of a difference. The harder she pushed, the more burned out she felt. One particularly busy Saturday morning, Emily was rushing around the bakery, trying to keep up with the influx of customers. The small kitchen was a whirlwind of activity. Grace was manning the ovens, their part-time cashier was ringing up orders, and Emily was running back and forth between taking orders and filling them. The clatter of trays and the hum of conversation filled the air, but Emily felt like her mind was spinning faster than she could keep up. She was in the middle of preparing an order when she realized, with a sinking feeling, that she had completely forgotten to order more flour for the week. The shelves in the pantry were nearly empty, and without enough flour, she wouldn't be able to bake for tomorrow's orders. "Mom," Emily called, her voice rising with panic as she pulled Grace aside. "We're almost out of flour. I forgot to put the order in and we need it for tomorrow's batch." Grace's eyes widened, but she stayed calm. "It's okay, honey. We'll figure it out. You've been juggling so much. You're bound to forget a thing or two." Emily shook her head, frustration bubbling up inside her. "I can't afford to forget things, Mom. If we don't have enough flour, we'll have to close the bakery tomorrow, and we can't afford that." "We'll make it work," Grace said gently. "I can drive to the supply store this afternoon and pick some up. It's not the end of the world." But to Emily, it felt like the end of the world. Every mistake, every misstep, every forgotten order felt like another crack in the foundation of her dream. The pressure was suffocating, and she didn't know how much longer she could keep going like this. By the time Emily got home that evening, she was utterly spent. She dropped her keys on the counter and sat down at the kitchen table, her head resting in her hands. Ethan and Lily were at the table working on their homework, but when they saw their mother's exhausted expression, they exchanged a worried glance. "Mom, are you okay?" Lily asked softly, her big blue eyes filled with concern. Emily forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just a long day." "You've been saying that every day," Ethan said, his voice careful but firm. "You're working too much, Mom. It's not good for you." Emily's chest tightened with guilt. She knew her son was right, but what choice did she have? The bakery was barely breaking even, and if she didn't keep pushing, it would fail. But the more she worked, the more she felt like she was failing her children instead. "I'm just trying to make things better for us," Emily said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. I want this bakery to be something we can all be proud of, something that will give us security." Ethan looked down at his homework, his brow furrowed. "We're already proud of you, Mom. You don't have to kill yourself over it." Emily's heart ached at his words. She reached across the table and gently squeezed his hand. "I'm doing this for us. I just need a little more time to figure it all out." But deep down, Emily knew she was stretched too thin. Between the bakery, her kids, and trying to stay competitive with Sugar and Spice, she felt like she was being pulled in 100 different directions. The weight of it all was wearing her down, and no matter how hard she worked, it never seemed to be enough. The breaking point came one particularly brutal afternoon. It was a Thursday, the middle of the week, and business at Sweet Beginnings was slower than usual. Emily had spent the morning trying to work through the bakery's accounts, her frustration mounting as she realized that despite all her efforts, the numbers still weren't adding up. Rent was coming due in a week, and she wasn't sure she'd have enough to cover it. As she sat in the back office, hunched over the paperwork, she heard the door to the bakery swing open. "I'll be right out," she called, trying to keep the frustration from her voice. When she stepped into the front, she found a woman standing by the counter, a tall, impeccably dressed woman with sharp features and a confident smile. Something about her screamed money. "Hi, can I help you?" Emily asked, wiping her hands on her apron. The woman smiled, though there was something cold about it. "Actually, I was hoping we could chat. My name's Melissa. I own Sugar and Spice down the street." Emily felt her stomach tighten. The owner of her biggest competitor was standing in her bakery. She tried to keep her expression neutral, though a knot of dread was forming in her chest. "Oh, what can I do for you?" Melissa glanced around the bakery, her gaze taking in the quaint, rustic decor, the shelves lined with homemade bread and pastries. "I just wanted to stop by and introduce myself. It's good to know your competition after all." Emily forced a smile, though her mind was racing. "Right. Well, welcome to Sweet Beginnings." Melissa's eyes flicked back to Emily, her smile never wavering. "I've heard good things about your place. It's cute, a little old-fashioned, but I guess that's your angle." Emily's hands tightened into fists beneath the counter. "We're more focused on quality than trends," she said, her voice steady. Melissa raised an eyebrow. "Of course, though I'd be careful if I were you. The market's tough these days, especially with so many new places opening up. A lot of smaller bakeries struggle to keep up, but I'm sure you'll figure it out." Emily's heart pounded in her chest as Melissa's words sank in. Was this woman here to offer her some kind of backhanded compliment? Or was she here to rattle her, to remind her that Sugar and Spice was the shiny new business in town with more resources and a bigger budget? Before Emily could respond, Melissa gave a small wave and turned toward the door. "Good luck," she called over her shoulder, her voice dripping with insincerity. "I'm sure you'll need it." The moment the door closed behind her, Emily felt like the wind had been knocked out of her. She slumped against the counter, her chest heaving with frustration and anxiety. She knew competition was part of running a business, but something about Melissa's visit had pushed her to the edge. For the first time since opening Sweet Beginnings, Emily wondered if she was in over her head. Maybe she wasn't cut out for this after all. Maybe it was time to admit defeat. That evening, Emily sat at her kitchen table staring at her phone. For the past hour, she had been debating whether or not to call Daniel. She had been avoiding him lately, not because she didn't want to talk to him, but because she didn't want him to know how much she was struggling. He had done so much for her already. How could she admit that she was barely keeping her head above water? But the weight of her stress was becoming unbearable. And as much as she hated to admit it, she needed help. With a deep breath, she dialed Daniel's number. "Hey, Emily." Daniel's voice came through the phone, warm and familiar. How's everything going?" Emily hesitated, the words catching in her throat. It's tough, Daniel," she finally admitted, her voice shaking. "I'm trying so hard, but I don't know if I can keep up. The bakery's doing okay, but with all the bills and the competition, I feel like I'm drowning." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Emily braced herself for Daniel's response. She had half expected him to sound disappointed, but when he spoke, his voice was filled with concern, not judgment. "I'm sorry you're feeling like this, Em," Daniel said softly. "I know how hard you've been working, and I know how much this means to you. But you don't have to do it all alone. Let me help." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. "I don't want to be a burden, Daniel. You've already done so much for me. I feel like I'm letting you down." "You're not letting me down," Daniel replied, his voice firm. "You're doing something incredible, Emily. You started a business from nothing, and that's no small thing, but even the best entrepreneurs need support. I'm your brother, and I want to be there for you, just like you've always been there for me." Emily wiped her eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Daniel. I didn't want to admit that I needed help." "There's no shame in asking for help," Daniel said gently. "You're strong, Em. But even the strongest people need a hand sometimes." As they talked, Emily felt the weight of her stress begin to lift, if only slightly. Maybe she didn't have to carry everything on her own. Maybe it was okay to lean on her family, to let Daniel help her through the rough patches. She wasn't alone, and that realization gave her the strength to keep going. After the emotional phone call with Daniel, Emily felt as though a massive weight had been lifted off her chest. His words of encouragement and reassurance had given her the permission she hadn't realized she needed to let go of the pride that had been holding her back and embrace the idea of receiving support. The next morning, as she stood in the bakery before it opened, Emily looked around at what she had built. There were moments when it seemed like it might crumble. But now, in the early morning quiet, Sweet Beginnings felt like a place full of possibilities again. The familiar smells of freshly baked bread and cinnamon rolls drifted through the air. The tables were set, and a soft light poured in through the windows. Emily had poured so much of herself into this place, and now it was time to face the next chapter with a clearer head. If she was going to survive as a business owner, she had to accept that she couldn't do everything alone. She needed to make smarter choices, use her resources wisely, and, most importantly, lean on the people who cared about her. Later that day, after the morning rush had subsided, Emily sat down with Grace in the back office. She had a plan in mind, but she wanted to talk it over with her mother first. "I've been thinking," Emily began, her voice steady but thoughtful, "about everything that's happened the past few weeks. I've been trying to do it all by myself, running this place, taking care of the kids, staying competitive with sugar and spice. But it's too much." Grace looked at her daughter with concern, but also with the quiet wisdom she had always carried. "You've been pushing yourself too hard, Emily, I've seen it. But I know how much this bakery means to you." Emily nodded. "It does mean a lot, but I can't keep burning myself out like this. I've decided that I'm going to hire another full-time baker to help take some of the load off." Grace smiled softly, her expression full of approval. "That's a smart move. You don't have to be everything to everyone, honey. Having someone to share the responsibility will help you focus on what matters most." Emily let out a long breath. "Exactly. I can't keep up with the competition if I'm running myself into the ground. I need to make changes if I want Sweet Beginnings to survive." The conversation felt like the start of something new, an acknowledgement that she couldn't do it all, and that was okay. It wasn't about giving up control, it was about learning how to share the weight. With a renewed sense of purpose, Emily set her plan in motion. That week, Emily placed an ad for a full-time baker. The process of hiring someone new felt daunting at first. She had never thought she'd need extra hands so soon after opening, but it quickly became clear that it was the right decision. Within days, she received a handful of promising applications, and after a few interviews, she hired someone who felt like the perfect fit. Carla, a friendly and experienced pastry chef who had worked in several well-known bakeries around town. Carla was exactly the kind of person Emily needed, competent, enthusiastic, and eager to bring new ideas to the table. On her first day, she jumped in without hesitation, taking over many of the day-to-day baking tasks and freeing Emily up to focus on other aspects of the business. "You've really built something special here," Carla said one morning as they worked side by side in the kitchen. "I've heard so many good things about Sweet Beginnings from people in the neighborhood. They love how it feels like a real community spot." Emily smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. "That's exactly what I wanted. I didn't want it to feel like one of those chain cafes or a trendy place that only appeals to a certain crowd. I wanted it to be somewhere people could come and feel at home." "You've definitely accomplished that," Carla said. "I'm excited to be part of it." With Carla's help, the bakery started to run more smoothly. Emily was no longer trying to do everything at once, and the relief of sharing the workload allowed her to focus on improving other areas of the business. She had more time to interact with customers, try new recipes, and think strategically about the future. But even as the bakery began to stabilize, Emily knew that there was one more aspect of her life that needed attention: her relationship with her children. She had been so consumed with the bakery that Ethan and Lily had fallen to the wayside. It was time to make things right. One Friday evening, after closing the bakery early, Emily decided to surprise Ethan and Lily with a family night. She picked them up from school and took them to their favorite pizza place, something they hadn't done in months. As they sat in a cozy booth laughing and talking over slices of pizza, Emily realized just how much she had missed spending time with them. "You've been working a lot, Mom," Ethan said, his tone casual but pointed. Emily nodded, her heart heavy with guilt. "I know I have. I'm sorry, Ethan. I know I haven't been around as much as I should." Lily, who was sitting next to her brother, looked up from her pizza. "It's okay, Mom. We know you're working hard for us." Emily smiled at her daughter's sweet words, but deep down she knew it wasn't okay. Yes, she was working hard to provide for them, but that didn't change the fact that they needed her present in their lives, not just as someone who put food on the table, but as their mother. "I'm going to do better," Emily said, her voice full of resolve. "I've hired someone to help out at the bakery, which means I'll have more time to spend with you guys. I don't want you to feel like you're going through this alone. We're a family and we'll figure this out together." Ethan smiled, though there was still a hint of worry in his eyes. "That sounds good, Mom." Lily beamed, clearly excited about the idea of seeing more of her mother. "Maybe we can go to the movies next weekend," Emily laughed, her heart feeling lighter than it had in weeks. "We'll definitely make time for the movies." That night, after they returned home, Emily sat in the living room with Ethan and Lily, watching a movie and enjoying the simple pleasure of being together. It wasn't extravagant or complicated. It was just time spent with the people who mattered most. And for the first time in a long while, Emily felt like she was finally finding the balance she had been searching for. Just as things seemed to be falling into place, an unexpected challenge came Emily's way. One morning, as she was prepping for the day's orders with Carla, she noticed a letter in the mail from the city's zoning board. Her heart sank as she opened it and read the words that confirmed her worst fear. There was a dispute over her bakery's outdoor seating area. Apparently, a neighbor had lodged a complaint about the number of tables outside the bakery, claiming that they were obstructing the sidewalk. The letter warned that Emily might need to reduce her seating or face fines. It was the last thing she needed, especially with the busy holiday season approaching. Emily called Daniel later that day, her voice tight with frustration. "I just got a letter from the city. Someone complained about the outdoor seating and now they're saying I might have to cut it down. I don't know how I'm going to deal with this on top of everything else." Daniel listened patiently before responding, his voice calm and reassuring. "I know this is frustrating, but you've handled bigger challenges than this, Em. We'll figure it out. You might need to make some adjustments, but it doesn't mean it's the end of the world." "I know," Emily sighed. "It just feels like every time I take a step forward, something pulls me back." Daniel's voice softened. "That's how it is when you're running a business. It's a constant push and pull. But you're strong, Emily. You've come this far and you're not alone in this." With Daniel's support, Emily took action. She reached out to the city to discuss the seating issue, determined to find a solution that wouldn't jeopardize her business. After several weeks of negotiations and back-and-forth meetings, she was able to come to an agreement with the city. She would reduce the number of outdoor tables slightly, but she wouldn't have to remove them altogether. The setback had shaken her confidence for a moment, but in the end, it reminded her of something important. She was capable of handling the unexpected. She had faced far worse challenges in her life, and she had always found a way through. This was no different. As the holiday season approached, Sweet Beginnings was busier than ever. Customers flocked to the bakery for holiday treats, and Emily's seasonal pastries became a neighborhood favorite. The warmth and joy of the holidays filled the air, and for the first time in months, Emily felt a true sense of accomplishment. Carla had become an invaluable part of the team, and together, they had developed a smooth system that kept the bakery running efficiently. Grace was still helping out, but with more balance and less pressure. And most importantly, Emily had found a way to spend more time with her children, reconnecting with Ethan and Lily, and being the mother they needed. One evening, as she stood in the bakery after closing, watching the snow fall softly outside the windows, Emily reflected on how far she had come. The past few months had been a roller coaster of emotions, stress, exhaustion, doubt. But through it all, she had persevered. She had learned to let go of her pride and accept help when she needed it. She had found balance in her life, not by doing everything herself, but by trusting the people around her. Sweet Beginnings was more than just a bakery. It was a symbol of her resilience, her determination, and the love she had for her family. And as she stood there, surrounded by the warmth of the shop she had built with her own hands, Emily knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. As the holiday season came into full swing, Sweet Beginnings thrived. Customers filled the bakery from morning until closing, drawn in by Emily's seasonal specialties: gingerbread cookies, cranberry scones, and warm cinnamon rolls fresh from the oven. The air was thick with the scent of sugar and spice, and the festive decorations added to the cozy, inviting atmosphere that Emily had worked so hard to create. But this time, things felt different. The frantic, overwhelmed energy that had once weighed down every step Emily took was gone. Carla was handling much of the day-to-day baking, Grace was still a comforting presence, and Emily had learned to delegate tasks to her small but capable staff. For the first time since opening the bakery, she wasn't running herself into the ground trying to do everything at once. More importantly, Emily had found a way to reconnect with her children. Their Friday night pizza dinners had become a weekly tradition, and she made sure to set aside time on weekends to be with them, whether it was watching a movie at home or taking them to the park to unwind. The balance wasn't perfect, but it was a vast improvement from where she had been just a few months ago. One evening, after the bakery had closed, Emily stood by the front window, watching as families strolled through the snow-covered streets. The bakery's soft glow lit up the sidewalk, and the holiday decorations in the windows sparkled with a warmth that made her heart swell. She was proud of the bakery, of the life she had built, and of the way she had managed to bring everything together. As she reflected on how far she had come, Daniel walked through the door, his coat dusted with snow. "Hey, Em," he said, flashing her a warm smile. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by." Emily's face lit up when she saw him. "Perfect timing. I was just about to close up for the night." She walked over to him and gave him a hug, grateful for his presence. "How's everything with you?" "Busy but good," Daniel said as he looked around the bakery. "It looks amazing in here. You've really built something special, Emily." Emily smiled, but this time, it wasn't the hesitant smile she had worn so many times before. This one was full of quiet pride and contentment. "Thanks. It's been a lot of work, but it's worth it." Daniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been meaning to tell you. Mom and I are proud of you. You've done more than just open a bakery. You've built a place that people love, and you've found a way to make it all work, even when it felt impossible." Emily's heart swelled at her brother's words. She had been through so much, but hearing Daniel's approval, knowing he saw the effort she'd put into balancing her business and her family, made everything feel even more worthwhile. "I couldn't have done it without you," Emily admitted, her voice soft but sincere. "You believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself." Daniel shrugged modestly. "You didn't need me to believe in you. You just needed someone to remind you of how strong you already were." The siblings shared a moment of quiet understanding. It had been a long, emotional journey for both of them, one that had led them to reconnect not just as siblings, but as people who understood the value of family, love, and perseverance. As the weeks passed, Sweet Beginnings continued to grow in popularity. With Carla's help, Emily had expanded the menu to include a variety of pastries and specialty cakes that drew in even more customers. They began offering catering services for local events, and word of mouth spread quickly. The bakery became a hub for the community, a place where people gathered not just for the food, but for the welcoming atmosphere that Emily had cultivated. One day, a local food blogger visited the bakery and wrote a glowing review about the homey vibe and delicious pastries, especially highlighting Emily's signature cinnamon rolls. Within days, the bakery's social media following exploded, and soon they were getting more orders than ever before. Emily's confidence grew with each passing day. She no longer feared failure the way she once had. Instead, she embraced the challenges that came with success. The bakery wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, and with it, Emily had found a new sense of purpose and fulfillment. Carla, too, had become an integral part of the team. She brought fresh ideas and new energy to the bakery, and Emily trusted her completely to manage the kitchen on the busiest days. The two women had formed a friendship that went beyond work, and Emily was grateful to have someone she could rely on, not just as a colleague, but as a friend. "We're really making a name for ourselves," Carla said one afternoon as they prepared a catering order for a holiday party. "I think this place is going to be around for a long time." Emily smiled as she carefully packed a tray of cookies. "I hope so. It feels like we're building something lasting here." With the bakery on solid ground, Emily began to reflect more deeply on her identity, not just as a business owner or a mother, but as a woman who had learned to rebuild her life from the ground up. For so long, she had been defined by her struggles. She had been the single mom scraping by, the woman who had lost her way after years of financial hardship. But now, she was something more. She was a successful entrepreneur, a mother who had fought to provide for her children, and a sister who had found her way back to her family. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt, but those moments no longer defined her. Emily had found a strength within herself that she hadn't known existed, a quiet resilience that had carried her through the darkest times. And now she was ready to embrace the next chapter of her life with that same strength. One evening after closing the bakery, she sat down at the kitchen table with Ethan and Lily to go over their homework. As they chatted and worked through math problems, Emily realized just how much had changed. She was no longer the exhausted, overworked mother who barely had time to spend with her kids. She was present, physically and emotionally, and that made all the difference. "Mom, do you think we can help you at the bakery over the holidays?" Ethan asked, his eyes bright with excitement. "I've been practicing making those gingerbread cookies you showed me." Emily smiled at her son, feeling a deep sense of pride. "I'd love that," she said warmly. "We'll make it a family tradition." Lily clapped her hands together in excitement. "Can I decorate the cookies?" "Of course," Emily laughed. "You two are going to be my best helpers." In that moment, surrounded by her children, Emily felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. She had found her balance, not just as a business owner, but as a mother. And now, she was ready to move forward with a heart full of love and gratitude. The holiday season at Sweet Beginnings was busier than ever, and the bakery was packed with customers looking for holiday treats. The warmth and joy that filled the space were palpable, and Emily couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of accomplishment as she looked around at the bustling shop. On Christmas Eve, as the bakery closed early, Emily found herself alone in the quiet shop. The lights twinkled in the windows, and the snow fell softly outside, covering the street in a blanket of white. She stood behind the counter, taking in the peaceful scene and reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. It had been a long, difficult road, but she had made it. She had built something from nothing, not just a bakery, but a life for herself and her children. And in doing so, she had found a strength she hadn't known she possessed. As she stood there, the door to the bakery opened, and Grace stepped inside, bundled up in a heavy coat. "I thought I'd come by to help you close up," she said with a smile. Emily's heart swelled at the sight of her mother. Grace had been her rock through everything, always there with a kind word or a helping hand, even when things seemed impossible. "I was just thinking about how far we've come," Emily said softly, walking over to her mother. "It feels like a different life now." Grace smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "You've come a long way, Emily, and you've done it with grace and strength. I couldn't be prouder of you." Emily felt tears well up in her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy, not of exhaustion or frustration. She wrapped her arms around her mother in a tight hug, grateful for the woman who had always believed in her, even when she couldn't believe in herself. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom," Emily whispered. "Thank you for everything." Grace smiled, pulling back to look at her daughter. "You did this, Emily. You fought for this. And now you're exactly where you're meant to be." As they finished locking up the bakery for the night, Emily took one last look around, feeling a sense of peace and fulfillment that she hadn't felt in years. The journey wasn't over. There would always be new challenges to face, but for now she was content. She had built a business, a life, and a family that she was proud of, and no matter what the future held, she knew she had the strength to face it head on. Thank you for following Emily's journey. If you enjoy the story of resilience, family, and the power of pursuing your dreams, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content. We'll continue bringing you heartwarming stories of overcoming challenges, embracing new beginnings, and finding strength in unexpected places. Hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss out on our next story.